All right, the next step in our project is to create the player. And so we want a new scene, which we've already got just by virtue of having a new project. We have a new scene that we are working with. And the first thing that we need to do is over in the scene tab, we need to select what the root node for the scene is going to be. It gives you some default options like 2D scene, 3D scene, user interface. Odds are you will never use any of those. You're going to want something a little bit more specific than just a 2D scene. You're going to want a character body 2D or an area 2D or even just a simple node, which is oddly enough not one of the default options. So we're just going to go to other node, and for our player, we want the root node to be a character body 2D. And this is one that I'm going to use a lot, so I'm going to click on this little star, and it's going to add it to my favorites. So now in the future, when I want to add a new character body 2D node, I don't have to go searching for it, it'll just be here in the list. And you can see in the bottom here, the description, this is a 2D physics body specialized for characters moved by a script. That's exactly what we want. We're not going to use forces and velocities and the physics engine and stuff like that to move the player. We're going to move the player with a script. But we do still want the player to interact with other objects in the scene through the physics engine with collision detection and stuff like that. So that's going to be our root node, character body 2D. And we're going to rename this player. It's a good idea to rename your root node to whatever your scene is. And so if it's like the background scene, you would rename it background. If it was a coin scene, we're going to rename that coin, just so you know kind of what this thing is. So that's our player. We've got a little warning here. It says the node has no shape, so it can't collide or interact with other objects. We'll take care of that in just a little bit. So now we need to start adding some child nodes to our players because this is just a character body. So the first one we're going to add is an animated sprite. This is also one that we're going to use a lot, so I'm going to favorite that. And you can see in the description, it's a sprite node that contains multiple textures as frames to play for animation. So we'll add this, and this is what's going to not just provide the sprite for our player, but also the animations. And so over on the right in the inspector, with our animated sprite 2D selected, we're going to find the sprite frames property, and it's currently empty. So we're going to click on that and add a new sprite frames. Now, and this took me a while to kind of figure out with Godot, now that you've added it, you need to select it again to edit the sprite frames. So with the sprite frames selected, we now have a sprite frames tab down at the bottom, and we can start defining our animations for this node. So we're going to have 4 animations. They're going to be running along the bottom of the screen, running along the top of the screen, and then flipping from bottom to top and flipping from top to bottom. All of those animations are going to come from the same sprite sheet. So I'm going to rename our default node. Let's just start with run bottom. And to add the sprites for this animation, I'm going to click on this button in the middle on the top toolbar that says add frames from a sprite sheet. We can now select the sprite sheet that we want to add frames from. I'll use this animations PNG. And you can kind of see this grid pattern. It's tried to guess how many rows and columns there are in the sprite sheet. In this case, it got it wrong. There's 4 columns, but only 3 rows. So let me reduce the vertical count to 3, and now you can see it's divided up correctly. So for the run bottom animation, it's going to be these top 4 frames. So I'm going to select those in order and add them to my animation. Now, if I play this, you can see the character is running. However, he's running a little bit too slow, so I want to increase the speed of this animation. So right here where it says 5 FPS, I'm going to click that up to 8. So 8 frames per second for this animation is about the right speed that I'm going for. Now for this game, you can see our sprites are very pixelated. That's intentional. We want this to look like kind of an old school 8-bit game. If your sprite in your scene window here is kind of blurry, like the pixels are being blended together, you can change that by expanding the texture property and changing filter from inherit to nearest. The reason why mine is not blurry, though it's using filter, is because in the project settings, I changed the default texture filter to nearest. By default, I want all of my textures in this game to just use the nearest filter mode, which means just pick the nearest picture from the source, or the nearest pixel from the source texture, rather than trying to blend pixels together. So that's why mine looks pixelated, which is what I want. So that is our run bottom animation. Now let's do the same thing for run top. I'll rename this run top. We will click add frames from sprite sheet. We'll select the same sprite sheet, and this time we're going to use the last 4 frames of the character running upside down. Same thing, we'll increase the speed to 8 frames per second, and now if we play, we can see him running upside down. Do the same thing for, we'll call this one flip bottom to top. Go add the frames from our sprite sheet. And really the 3 flipping frames are these 3 in the middle, but we want to include 1 frame from the running bottom animation and 1 frame from the running top animation so that it begins and ends with the running animations. So we'll start with that running frame, and then we'll do the 3 flipping over frames and end with the running on top, the first frame from the running on top animation. So we'll add all 5 of those. We'll increase the speed to 8. Now if we play, we can see him flipping over. But unlike the running animations, we don't want this one to loop. We want it to end as soon as he's upside down. So to do that, we're going to uncheck this animation looping button. And so now, when this animation plays, as soon as it reaches the last frame, it will stop playing. And this is good because when our character flips over, we don't want him to keep flipping over and over and over. We want him to stop in this position until he reaches the other side of the screen, and then he'll start running again. So we'll do this same thing for our last animation, flip top to bottom, and we'll add the frames from our sprite sheet. Now we don't have a separate animation for this, we're just going to use the same frames from our flip bottom to top animation, but backwards. So we'll start with the upside down running frame, and then go backwards, selecting the frames for this animation. So the order you select the frames in, you can even see here, it says 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That defines the order that they're going to play in. So we'll add those frames, we'll increase the speed to 8, and like the other flip animation, we don't want this looping. So we'll uncheck that animation looping button. Click play, we can see him flip over the other way. So now if we play these kind of in a expected order, we can see the player running. We can flip from bottom to top. We can see the player running on top. And then we can flip from top to bottom. So those are our 4 animations for the game. Now, these sprites are very, very small. I think each individual sprite is just 16 by 16 pixels. And so I want the player sprite to be a little bit bigger. So I'm actually going to scale just the animated sprite node up. I'm not going to scale the parent. This was a question that was asked in class, and it was a good question. Typically when you do transforms for your nodes, you want to do those transforms as low level as possible. You don't want to transform the parent, you don't want to transform everything, you just want to transform the thing that needs to be transformed, which in this case is the animated sprite 2D. The other reason we're not going to scale the parent is because you really don't want to do any transforms, any scaling or position changes or rotations to your scene's root node, because once we add this scene to another scene, the other scene is going to transform it, and that's going to override whatever transforms we've done to the parent in this scene. So we're just going to scale the animated sprite 2D. We'll expand the transform property, and we'll find scale, and we'll change each X and Y scale up to 6. By default, these are linked, so if you change one, it's going to change both of them. But if you ever want to, you can unlink these, and now you can apply different scales in the X and Y directions, which is not what I want to do. So I'll change that back, and I will link these. So that takes care of our animations. The last thing we need to do for our player is we need to address this warning about the node has no shape. Now you may be wondering, of course it has a shape. Look, there's a sprite. That's what it looks like. But what it means is a shape with regards to the physics engine. How does this thing collide and interact with other things in the scene? And it's never going to use your sprite to figure that out, because your sprite is what it looks like on the screen, not what it looks like to the physics engine. And for physics, you usually want much simpler shapes, usually like rectangles, circles, stuff like that. The math for calculating intersections and collisions and stuff is much easier with simple shapes than with complex geometries like a sprite. So we're going to select the player, we're going to add a new node, and this time we're going to find collision shape 2D. Once again, very common node that we're going to use a lot, so I'm going to favorite this. And you can see in the description down here, a node that provides a shape 2D to a collision object 2D parent. So our character body 2D that we use for the root node is a collision object 2D. It is a type of collision object 2D and inherits from a collision object 2D. So this collision shape is going to provide the shape for that collision object parent. So we'll create that, and then with our collision shape 2D selected, we're going to come over to the inspector, going to find the shape, and it's currently empty. And if we click on that, we have a couple of different built-in shapes that we can choose from. And we're going to choose the capsule shape 2D. Capsules are very common for players, for NPCs, for characters that move around because they have that curved bottom. And so if you're moving across a floor or a surface that can change, like with ramps and hills and stuff like that, it's a lot easier to move over with a capsule than it is something like a rectangle. So we will add that capsule shape. Now if you want to, you can change the dimensions of this capsule in the scene window by dragging these handles for the width and height. Or you can click on the capsule shape 2D in the inspector and you can put in specific values for each of those. So I'm going to put in specific values. For the radius, I want this to be 30. And for the height, I want this to be 96. So that's a nice tight fit for this capsule shape around the player. And you can see if I select the animated sprite and play some of these animations that, some of the pixels are going to move outside of that shape. That's okay. It doesn't need to be like pixel perfect for every single frame. We just want a good generalization of the shape of the player. So that's going to take care of our player scene. So we're now going to save this. I'll press Control S to save, and we select where we want to save this. I want to put all of my scenes in a scenes folder. So I'm going to click up here in the top right corner, create a new folder. I will name it scenes, and now I will save this as player.tscn. So now over in my file system tab, you can see under scenes is player.tscn. And so this is a player scene, and I can reuse this scene over and over in other scenes to create instances of player. Now, for our player, we're really only ever going to have one instance, but for other things like our coins and our obstacles and our background frames and everything, those are all going to be their own separate scenes, and we're going to create multiple instances or clones of those scenes to add them to our game. So now let's create our main scene. So we're going to create a new scene. We can either go to the scene menu and say new scene, or you can also click this little plus at the top of the scene window to add a new scene. And just like before, we need to choose a root node for our scene. And again, we're not going to choose any of these, so we're going to go to other node. And this time we're just going to choose node. This is like the root of every other type of node. It is the most basic type of node. And this is what we're going to use for our main scene, because our main scene, the root itself, isn't going to do anything. It doesn't have a position, it's not going to have a shape or anything. It's just a container to hold all of the other nodes in our game. So we'll choose that, and we will rename this main. Because this is our main scene, this is the scene that's going to be the game. You could also name it Run Jumper, you can name it The Game, whatever you want. I'm just going to name it main because I like to name my root nodes after the scene. Now let's add our new player to the main scene. So to do that, we're not going to add a child node because we're not adding a node, we're adding a scene. So I can right click on main and either choose instantiate child scene. And if I do it that way, it'll give me a pop-up where I can choose one of any of the scenes in my game. The way that I like to do it is I can take the player scene in my file system tab and literally just drag it out into the window. So that's going to add an instance of player to my scene. You can see it say now a child of the main node, and it has its own transform with its position, rotation, and scale. And so this is what I was talking about earlier. I can take this and scale the player up, 2x, and it's going to scale everything about the player up 2x. I can rotate it, I can change its position, but I'm not changing anything about, um, well, I guess I am. I'm changing the transform of the player. And so if I had changed any of those properties, the position, rotation, scale of the root node in my player scene, this would be overriding those. So that's why you never want to change the transform of your scene, your root node. So now we're going to position our player where we want in the scene. And I'm going to, again, you could just drag it around in the actual scene editor if you want, or you can come over to the inspector and put in specific values that you want. So I'm going to change the position to 134 in the X direction and 384 in the Y direction. So that's going to put the player pretty far over on the left, not all the way up against the edge of the screen, but pretty far over, and right smack in the middle. And even if I want to preview this scene now, if I actually want to play the game, you have to first save your scene. So let's save the scene first. I will save this as main. And now, if I want to play, it says there's no main scene has been defined. In this case, the use of the term main is just coincidental because I have a scene called main. What it means is I have not selected a scene as like the game, which I need to do to just play. So you can select a scene that you have saved, or you can just say select current, which is the scene I'm currently editing is the default main scene. So just choose that. So now we'll get a little preview of our game, and we can see our player right there in the middle of the screen. So that takes care of creating the player scene and creating the main scene, and also creating an instance of our player within the main scene. This is something we're going to do over and over. We're going to create different scenes for all the different collectibles, for the obstacles, for the background, and then we will create instances or add instances of those scenes to our main scene. So getting this under your belt, getting familiar with creating scenes and adding them to other scenes is going to be very handy, as it's going to come up over and over and over again.